Hello, my name is Irish Muniz, as you already know, and my research paper was on working conditions in the game industry, like the video game industry. In general, the general scope of my topic was, hey, is unionization a way to prevent the bad working conditions in the game industry? Because plain and simple, the game industry exploits their workers, and there's pretty much nothing stopping them because in the short term they do get benefits or like profits. So that was mostly what this research paper was focusing on: unionization and the working conditions in the video game industry. So the first thing I did for researching for this paper is I did a general search like on Google just to see, hey, what are people talking about? What are some keywords I can use? And so on, just so I can know like, hey, what are the big names and what are the big like research papers and that such. And so after that, I took that general search and then went onto like ProQuest JSTOR and just looked through them using keywords like unions, workers, overtime, health, just things related to overtime, mostly overtime because that's the big issue with the game industry. And I also even found one YouTube video on just the general talk about unionization and some worker anecdotes, which was pretty helpful for my paper. After this research process, so for some background information, I'm going to talk possibly a little bit about crunch time, which is basically just like right before a game is about to be released. Workers typically will work a lot more than usual, and this is called crunch. Like, hey, because we gotta get things done. Another thing that's kind of important to know is that kind of the whole reason why all this exploitation is happening in the first place is because developers are pretty passionate about working in game development. Because, it's video games, right? People love video games, and and most people like a dream to actually make video games. And so that's kind of the reason why this is happening in the first place. Like the normal IT or other programming jobs don't have this issue. It's just game development, really. And also, there's also currently a unionization by I think it's a Game Developers Unite, something along that line. They're trying to push for unionization in the industry, and overall, it's only in the past few years or so there's just been a small push towards unionization of the industry because of this exploitation. And so, what do I mean by exploitation? Well, companies are basically abusing overtime. Like developers are just working a large amount of overtime, and it's kind of frankly immoral because workers will probably be working like 12 to 15 hours every day throughout the entire week, and that just doesn't it's just not very healthy for the workers. Like, for example, they took a survey, the quality of life in the game industry, challenges the best practices of that group. What they did is they took a survey, right? And 35.2% of respondents, they said they worked 65 to 80 hours per week. So a third of workers. And 13% work over 80 hours. And in those cases where they're working over 80 hours, they are working up to 14 hours every single day in order to reach that 80 hours. And that's double the normal work week that most people work. It's just absolutely absurd. And if the industry was unionized, probably be prevented. Next is there's the only reason that this overtime even matters is because there's health issues. Workers will have fatigue, which means they don't really want to do anything because they're just fatigued, as kind of the name suggests. And that's more of a mental issue if anything else. But besides that, they also results in unhealthy lifestyle because when you're working the entire day nonstop, you're going to end up because of that exhaustion, you're going to end up turning to more unhealthy things like alcohol, or maybe you're just not going to exercise as much because you don't have the time, and so forth. And then this overworking of yourself ends up leading to chronic tension, which is not really good for your heart and not really good for your lifespan. It's just not overall good for the workers to have these extreme working conditions. And again, unions, they would fix that. They would push for the worker to say, hey, our workers, they can't really stand these working conditions, and it's not really good for them. And not only that, another argument I go into the research paper about is that it's kind of unnecessary that in the first place that companies are even exploiting their workers this way. Because when it comes to overtime, workers are producing more errors, which causing them to need to work more, right, to fix those errors. But if they worked less in the first place, they wouldn't be producing those errors. Workers can be just as efficient when they have a lower amount of hours because they're more refreshed and they're not exhausted. And also, with proper management, you don't even need to work 80 hours per week in the first place. You just need to make sure workers are working as productively as possible and just have the proper management for that. And so it's pretty much unnecessary that companies are even exploiting their workers in the first place. And unions would probably fix that because they would advocate for the workers saying, hey, whoa, what are you doing? We should be doing this instead. And this, again, because companies are so focused on profit, they're just not really caring about the workers too much and not really caring that how they're doing things is pretty much unnecessary. And so, a counter argument for hey, we should have unions is that games are kind of costly. They'll take years. For example, Destiny probably took 10 years to produce and millions of dollars. So yeah, they're also pretty costly to make, and that is kind of a fair counter argument. However, I would like to point out, like I said previously on the other slide, it is pretty much unnecessary that companies are making their workers spend so much time in overtime, right? And so if it's unnecessary, that means you could probably have the same amount of worker production working less hours, which means it wouldn't take years and take longer, and it wouldn't the game wouldn't cost more. So basically I'm saying the game wouldn't cost more if you have proper management. And yeah, it is kind of fair that unionization would increase these costs, but it's not really known, and if proper management, maybe that's not true. So some of the references that were used in this is this article right here. This one kind of goes into the more the social consequences, and I didn't really go into much into here, but what I did address in this presentation was more the amount of time being worked and the extreme part of it. And I think this article also goes into passion. This one is the statistic that I use and the survey. This one goes into how workers will produce more bugs if they're overworked. This article goes into kind of how the health effects of the fatigue and the chronic tension. And also, this one goes into how with proper management, workers could probably make games in a normal work week. And this one kind of goes into a counter argument, hey, when you unionize an industry, they kind of increase the costs. And so that's kind of where I got my counter argument from. Anyways, this is my research paper, and that is it.